everybody, and welcome to the United Stand. The chart show is back. It's back. We missed it last week. I don't know why, but this is a fantastic show. I love it. So make sure you smash a like on the video. What is the chart show? Well, it's where we count down the Manchester United players' top 10 for this week based on, performances, but also a little bit like a chart show where, past performances don't necessarily mean that you go from number 1 out of the top 10. So look, if you can recall the top 10 from last time, Casemiro was number 1, Rashford was number 2, Luke Shaw was number 3, Dalot was number 4, WAN-BISSAKA was number 5. That was the top 5. So let's fly straight into it. Remember, we're looking at the games against Manchester City. Manchester is red, 2-1 win against them, and then obviously the Crystal Palace draw midweek. So we're looking at those two games when we're looking at the top 10 this week. Last time we did it, Garnacho was number 9. He drops 1 place to number 10 this week, and not because of bad performances, because there's a lot of people vying to get in the top 10 this week. Garnacho didn't really do anything against Crystal Palace, but against Manchester City, I felt that his performance was really, really good. What I like about Garnacho is that when he plays, something happens. It doesn't always good, it's not always good. Sometimes he'll go to the byline, the cross will be poor. Sometimes the shot, won't go in or it'll go over. But you compare him to Anthony at the moment, who isn't in the top 10 this week. There's no spot for Anthony in the top 10. Garnacho is in the top 10. He's at number 10, but he makes things happen even when they don't happen. And I know that doesn't make sense, but what I'm saying is that he's a game changer. And he's actually doing his job. Even if it doesn't come off, he tries to do something to score or to create. And obviously against Man City, he was the one who created that chance for Rashford. And, that was the match-winning cross. So Garnacho, number 10 this week, and completely deserves that as far as I'm concerned. This week's number 9 was last time out's number 8. So again, he drops one spot, MALACIA. But yet again, a player that did very well in the Manchester derby. Very well in the Manchester derby. Obviously, he didn't start against Crystal Palace, so he's probably not as high as he could have been. But I thought against Manchester City in the Manchester derby, when Mahrez started and you saw Luke Shaw at left centre-back, I think everybody quite rightly, and even MALACIA himself, I think would be quite comfortable with this. Everybody quite rightly thought MALACIA against Mahrez, that is the spot where there are alarm bells potentially. He played fantastically well. Now, you saw Mahrez against Spurs the other night. Brilliant. He is a brilliantly underrated player, in my opinion, Mahrez. And MALACIA did fantastically well against him. So that shows you the progression this lad's making. I think MALACIA is the epitome of development. Started the season on the bench. Luke Shaw was poor, took his place. Everyone was like, oh, it's our future left back. Then he had a couple of poor games. Luke Shaw came back in, and now he's in and out of the team. But I think for a first season at Manchester United, coming in from Feyenoord in the Eredivisie, this is what it's about. He is meant to be the understudy to Luke Shaw. He's meant to be the developmental player under Luke Shaw, and he is doing that. And he sometimes has a bad game, but then he has a fantastic game. And I think, I always say, look at Patrice Evra's first 6 months at Man United. It wasn't great. It was all about experience, learning about Manchester United, learning about the league. And I think if you compare MALACIA's first few months to Evra, it bodes really well. So I'm really pleased with MALACIA. There are still some bad performances in there, but there are some really good ones as well. And that's what development is all about. So big up to MALACIA. This week's number 8 is Christian Eriksen. He was also last time out's number 8, so no change from Eriksen. I think he's I've played the game. I think he's a steady Eddie. I think a steady Eddie can be quite an undermining thing, and that's how, Souness described Casemiro amazingly. But Eriksen is sort of... Look, I do the player ratings after every game. We do them together, don't we? And I think people sort of give Eriksen a 6 a lot. But a 6 is average, isn't it? And an average Eriksen performance is better than, most people's good game. So I think Eriksen is fundamental to the team. He obviously had to play a different role against Manchester City. I think against Crystal Palace in the first half, obviously it was his run and pass for Bruno that led to the goal. And I think like most of our team attacking side against Crystal Palace, he had a good first half and then he was tired in the second half. And Eriksen is having to play a lot of football. He's been playing since the start of August. He played the World Cup. it's a lot of football for any player. It's certainly a lot of football for someone like Eriksen, who, you know, is playing in a very demanding role. I always thought of Eriksen as a number 10 attacking midfielder, and we're using him as a box-to-box midfielder. It's demanding. It's demanding for anybody at this level to play 3 games a week and go to a World Cup. So there is a fatigue thing with Eriksen. This is why I'd like us to bring another midfielder in. But I don't think he's playing bad by any means. And I think if he was playing once a week, the same as Bruno, I think he'd be a lot better. I think a lot of this comes down to the demand the players have. But I'm happy with Eriksen's progress this season at Manchester United. Yeah, he is this week's number 8. This week's number 7 is Bruno. And I think he's a little bit unlucky to be this week's number 7, Bruno Fernandes. Because I felt that Bruno, man of the match against Manchester City. I thought he was absolutely fantastic. Scores in the first half against Crystal Palace. So why is he this week's number 7? I think he's this week's number 7 simply because there are better performances ahead of him, which hopefully you will see. But I like Bruno. Now, we're playing Arsenal, obviously, and people wondered why I didn't put Bruno in a combined 11 and I put Odegaard in there. Because Odegaard, if you've watched Arsenal, they're top of the league, and he's been ridiculously consistent from game 1. Bruno, I think, in recent weeks is getting better and better, and I don't think he's had a bad season, but we want the consistency from Bruno Fernandes. That is what we want. And we're starting to get that back, but I still don't think Bruno would say he's playing at his very best at the moment. So really, really interested to see what we get out of Bruno, and I'm looking forward to seeing what he can do. But look, he's a little bit unlucky to be this week's number 7, because I think he could have been higher. As I say, match winner against Manchester City. Goal scorer in the first half. I think the reason I didn't put him any higher was probably because even against Man City, he was in and out of the game, and then he had a really good 20 minutes at the end. And against Crystal Palace, he had a good first half, and then the second half he disappeared. So again, it's the volume of games, maybe the intensity of it, but Bruno is a bit tired. And I think the rest of the team I'm going to talk about, probably a little bit of consistency. There might be a bit of controversy here because this week's number 6 is Rashford. And I think people will say, well, why is Rashford ahead of Bruno Fernandes? But there is a rhythm to this. There is an explanation for this. And it basically comes down to the fact that with Bruno Fernandes, he was last week's number 6 and he's this week's number 7. Rashford was last time out's number 2. And I don't think Rashford deserves to go from 2 to 7, so he's this week's number 6. He did score 2 goals in the Manchester Derby as well. I don't think he was brilliant in the Manchester Derby, but he did score 2 goals in the Manchester Derby. He did get injured in the first half and he stayed on. I just think it felt like taking Rashford down from number 2 to 7 felt a bit too far, because he's not had a terrible week. I think against Crystal Palace, like many of our attackers, he faded in the second half. But yeah, look, you could swap Bruno around and put Bruno at 6 and Rashford at 7, but for me it felt a little bit too severe for him to go from last time out number 2 to this time out number 7, especially when he scored 2 goals in a Manchester Derby and played, with quite a bad knock in that as well. But look, it wasn't a great performance against Crystal Palace, I would admit that. So Rashford is this week's number 6, and as I said, I justify that because that's how the chart show's meant to work. We don't just do it uniquely on the week. A lot of it's based on the week performances, but also I think you've got to take into account where they were the week before, because that's how the chart show used to work. You never used to get that's how it works. That's how it works. There's a bit of momentum from the last time out, and he was very unlucky not to be number 1 last time. So Rashford down from 2 to 6, 4-place drop, probably our biggest dropper this week. There is a new entry coming in. There's one new entry. Martial obviously dropped out from last time. He was last week's number 10. He's not in the top 10 this week. This week's number 5 is not a new entry though. It is David De Gea. David De Gea is this week's number 5. He was last time out's number 4, so he has dropped a spot. But look, he had nothing to do in the Manchester Derby, David De Gea. Really, couldn't do anything about the goal and had a pretty average game. I think against Crystal Palace, arguably was man of the match. I thought he was fantastic against Crystal Palace. That save was magnificent, not done anything for 40 minutes. I thought his distribution against Crystal Palace was amazing. Compared to, where he was last year, I think you've got to big up the improvement. I'm not saying his distribution's as good as someone like a David Raya at Brentford, who's basically like having a number 10 in goal. But from where he was last year, I think David De Gea's improvement has been fantastic. I also think that when you look at it pragmatically, somebody said 20 seconds before Crystal Palace scored, David De Gea booted it long. I've played the game. I've coached the game. if my goalkeeper with 2 minutes to go is receiving the ball and playing out from the back when we're under pressure, I'd go mad at him. That's just knowledge. And also 20 seconds is a long time between David De Gea booting it long and a free kick happening. A lot happens in 20 seconds. So I'm not criticising a goalkeeper for booting it long with 2 minutes to go. I liked the way he was booting it long when Weghorst was on the pitch. As soon as Weghorst came off, we started playing out from the back. That's obviously tactical. Made a good few saves. So yeah, I think David De Gea, and I've not even put him on the screen. Sorry, we've kept Rashford. David, you're not going to get enough time. Sorry. David De Gea was this week's number 5. Last time out's number 4. David De Gea is David De Gea, isn't he? He's such a fantastic shot stopper. I think the experience, the leadership, the respect he has in the dressing room, especially with that back 5, he's a really important player. And I suspect he's going to be very busy against Arsenal, so he might well be in the top 5 this week, next week. Sorry. This week's number 4 is Luke Shaw. He was again last week's number 3. Everyone seems to be dropping a space and also almost doesn't deserve to do that. But that's the competition around people who are doing well in this at the moment. So this week's number 4 is Luke Shaw, left-sided centre-back against Manchester City. Worked brilliantly well with Varane. Spoke about it after the game. They were so intelligent as a backline. They'd move 10 yards back and then move 10 yards forward. And they were just constantly keeping City on their toes. They wouldn't stick to a defensive deep line or a high line. They were moving all the time because they didn't want City to settle into a rhythm of being able to knock the ball in behind or utilise their fullbacks pushing forward when we had a deep line. They were really intelligent in moving like that. And, Luke Shaw's not really a left-sided centre-back, but him and Varane worked so well together. He was brilliant against Manchester City. I think against Crystal Palace, again, maybe tiredness hit him a little bit. I don't think he was bad against Crystal Palace by any means. I do not think he was bad. But, it was... we couldn't get our fullbacks forward against Palace as much as we'd like to. We didn't really create enough chances. But defensively, Luke Shaw has been fantastic for weeks. And he is this week's number 4 for me, Luke Shaw. Number 3 is a new entry, and it's Raphael Varane. He wasn't even in the charts last time. I can't remember why. I think it was maybe lack of games, or maybe it was around the time the World Cup, the coming back from the World Cup. But look, similarly to Luke Shaw, I'm echoing what I said in that, but Varane is a better centre-back than Luke Shaw. We don't miss Maguire in the air, and that's a big tick in the box of Varane. Maguire's fantastic in the air. He might not be great at everything else, but he's very good in the air, Maguire, and if people want to whip crosses in, Maguire is quite good. But so is Varane. It's an underrated part of Varane's game that he is tall and he's good in the air, and we don't miss. We're not aerially weak when Maguire doesn't play in Varane does. So he's very, very good in the air. That's what Luke Shaw and Martinez can't be. He's brilliant in the air. He was superb against Manchester City, as I said, about the defensive line. He is the one that goes and fights for the ball, and he's very good at that. And I felt against Crystal Palace, he was really, really good in that game. I felt that our defence against Crystal Palace was really, really good, and it was going to take a worldie to score. They nearly scored one in the first half. David De Gea makes a great save. They did score one right at the end with the free kick. But, in open play, we're not conceding goals, and Varane is a massive part of that. So right back in at number 3. Again, I think sometimes Varane's performances do go under the radar. I think he is a little bit underrated at times. But I think Varane has been brilliant this week. And again, look, it's a big test against Arsenal. Look, we went to the Etihad with a strong defence and we got bombarded. A strong defence can only do so much. I must repeat this. A back 5 can be really strong and still be 3-0 down at half time because the midfield has to help. We can't lose the runners because if you're a centre-back, you know your job, you know what you're doing about your defensive line, you know what you're doing from set pieces, and you know what you're doing with their front 3. But when you've got runners beyond, like Xhaka does it a lot, Odegaard does it a lot, that's very hard for you to be picking them up when your job is to do something different. So, look, we could concede a lot of goals against Arsenal, but I think we're set up defensively very, very good, and Varane is fundamental to that. This week's number 2, I just want to give him a massive shout out. It's WAN-BISSAKA. Last time we did it, it was number 5. I very nearly gave him number 1, and I think many of you might agree he should be number 1. Wow, just wow, in the words of Ben Foster. Wow, it's absolutely fantastic from WAN-BISSAKA. Now, I still think Dalot's the better right back, and Dalot for me is our right back, but he's been injured twice since the World Cup, and that would be a fundamental problem for Manchester United if we didn't have this resurgence of WAN-BISSAKA. which has been nothing short of remarkable. All the noises out of Man United were that Wan-BISSAKA wanted to leave and United wanted him to go, and he was available in the summer and he was definitely going to go in January. Dalot gets these injuries, he comes in and it's almost like he's just grabbed the opportunity. Now, I still think going forward, I'm not going to overhype him. He's not particularly good going forward. He's okay going forward. But defensively, I mean, that tackle on Zaha at the end of the game, you get that wrong, it's a penalty, it's a red card, you know. It was. I never thought he wasn't going to make it because his form over the last 2 games, and I know he could have done better on the Grealish goal. He still is a little bit suspect on the back post cross from the right hand side, but everyone's got a weakness. But other than that, I thought he was superb against Manchester City. I thought he was even better against Crystal Palace. Maybe it was a little bit of going back to your old club sort of thing. If we wanted to sell Wan-BISSAKA in January, we wouldn't have a problem based on how good he's been. I don't think anybody would have bought him in January if he hadn't been playing like he had. So maybe a loan deal. I think someone would have gone, yeah, we'll take a loan risk on him. But I think people would buy him now. That's how good he's been. And we'd certainly be foolish to let him go. I think we solved the right-back problem in the summer. And I do think he probably will end up going in the summer because I think he's shown that he should be starting for a Premier League side. I mean, you never know. He might end up being our starting right back. I don't think he will, though. I don't think he can play the inverted, attacking, all over the place right back. I think he is an old school right back who can get forward, but ultimately is very good defensively. I think Wan-BISSAKA is a traditional right back, old school. A little bit like Mitchell is for Palace, actually. You can see why Palace would want him back. But the way that Ten Hag wants to play, his fullbacks are very, very, very modern, and I don't know that Wan-BISSAKA can do that. But as an understudy, he's been fantastic, and he deserves all the credit he's got, and he is my number 2 this week, which means that Casemiro holds on at the number 1 spot yet again. You know, for me, with Casemiro, I wouldn't mind moving him out of the number 1 spot. I mean, I nearly gave it Rashford last time, but he held it. But look, I think people have got a downer on Casemiro because he got that yellow card and he can't play against Arsenal. But ultimately, he is the only midfielder who is combative. Eriksen is not. Bruno is not. He will get another 5 yellow cards and miss 2 games before March. I guarantee it. Because his job is to be the enforcer. He is the person who puts the tackles in. It shouldn't be a surprise that he's missed the game because he's accumulated 5 yellow cards. And I think it'll happen again. Against Manchester City, they couldn't get down the middle. Luke Shaw, Casemiro, Varane, magnificent. Against Crystal Palace, he's on a yellow card, and for most of the game, Crystal Palace did sod all. And he, again, Man United with Casemiro and without Casemiro is so different. And that's what's worrying about the Arsenal game. I hope Martinez plays there and just does a job like Luke Shaw did at left centre-back when we didn't have Martinez. He is a leader. He is an orchestrator. He is a conductor. He is all those things and a lot more. He has been absolutely incredible for us for weeks and for Brazil in the World Cup in November. He is absolutely consistent. He very rarely, I don't think he ever has a bad game. He has a bad pass every now and again, but he never has a bad game. And, you know, I think against Crystal Palace, he would have been getting a very high score if he hadn't just made that free kick, which is part of his game. It's almost an insult if someone gets past him like Zaha, and you can't change what somebody is. And he just made that tackle. And I think after he'd done it, he thought, oh, God, I've just gone and done that. And I'm going to get out of the Arsenal game. But no, I think he deserves to be number 1. It's so hard to shift him. And I think Wan-BISSAKA probably pushes it a little bit. But he's a centre defensive midfielder who, for me, is certainly the best centre defensive midfielder in the league at the moment. I find it ridiculous that people want to compete with that. Thomas Partey is doing very, very well, but this is a guy who's won multiple Champions League for Real Madrid. It shouldn't be a surprise that he's the best CDM in the league. He's absolutely incredible, and he is my number 1 this week. Make sure you smash a like on the video. Get your comments in about anything that you think might be a little bit different. What I would say for next week is I'd like to see Anthony, who is starting games, getting into the top 10. You are a Manchester United player. You're a first-team player. You've got to be getting in the top 10. Now, for Martial, I understand it because he only played 45 minutes against Man City. Weghorst is a new signing, only played about 60 minutes. So there are other, top 10 you can't get 11 in. But Anthony, I think he needs to be starting to get in the number 10 position at least. He's got to start getting in there because Garnacho isn't really a starter and he's getting in ahead of him. So I want to see Anthony pushing himself in there because that's the development we want to see from him. But apart from that, I think, it's been a really good week for Manchester United. Disappointing the Palace thing, but those things happen. We didn't really deserve a second goal or do enough for a second goal, and they scored a worldie free kick. It's the way it goes. But the Man City win was the highlight. And hopefully next week, you know, we'll have a positive against Arsenal as well. Make sure you smash a like on the video and subscribe. I'll speak to you on the next one. Great to be back with the chart show. Remind me in the future. I don't know why we missed last week. We never should have done that. Take care. Speak to you in a bit.